it's kind of chilling when you think about it. People just vanishing, like they just step into thin air.
It really is.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into one of those unsettling cases, the disappearance of Brandon Swanson.
Right.
And this case, it's not your typical missing persons case. We actually have a really detailed timeline of Brandon's final hours, thanks to a string of phone calls he made that night.
Yeah.
But the ending, well, it's a total head-scratcher.
What's so fascinating about this case is that, the level of contact we have right up until the moment of Brandon's disappearance. His last words were captured on a phone call with his father. And it's chilling, especially because we still can't say for sure what they mean,
Yeah.
what exactly was happening on the other end of the line.
So let's set the scene a little bit. It's May 2008, rural Minnesota. And Brandon, he's a 19-year-old college student, driving home after celebrating the end of his first year.
Okay.
It's late, around 1:15 in the morning, when he ends up stranded in a ditch on this dark, deserted gravel road. You can practically feel the isolation, right?
Yeah.
Stuck in this ditch, unable to get his car out, Brandon does what many of us would do. He calls his parents.
Of course.
And he tells them he thinks he's near Lind, which is, a small town, and that he can see these lights in the distance.
Right.
Seems simple enough.
Yes, except he wasn't anywhere near Lind.
It gets way more complicated, way more intriguing, honestly.
Much later, his car was found miles away near Taunton, which is about 25 miles from where he thought he was. And this level of disorientation, it just suggests something more than just being lost.
Right.
Was he under the influence of alcohol, which could have impaired his judgment? Could this point to some medical condition that suddenly affected him? It's, one of the first big questions in this mystery.
Yeah, that's a big one. And, imagine being Brandon's parents getting that call in the dead of night. Like, you'd rush out to help without a second thought, right? That's exactly what they did. They drove to the location that Brandon had described, but he wasn't there. And they stayed on the phone with him the whole time.
Oh, wow.
All of them getting increasingly frustrated trying to navigate this maze of dark country roads.
Oh, I can only
It
imagine.
must have been agonizing for everyone involved.
Yeah, his dad even dropped his mom back home and continued looking for Brandon while staying on the phone with him. They were desperate to find him.
And so there they are, right? They're driving around in the dark, each convinced that they're getting closer, when Brandon decides he's had enough of driving in circles. He tells his dad he's spotted some lights in the distance, and he's going to walk toward them, hoping to find someone, anyone, who can help.
Wow.
Keep in mind it's nearly 2:30 in the morning at this point.
And it's during this walk, after almost an hour on the phone with his father, that Brandon utters those chilling last words, oh shit, just before the line goes dead.
And that's it. Silence. What happened in those final moments? What did Brandon see or experience that made him say that? It sends shivers down your spine just thinking about it.
I know, that's the most unsettling part, right?
Yeah.
Cell phone pings later provided this rough path of his movements, but the why, the how, it's all shrouded in mystery.
That sudden silence, those last two words, I can only imagine the panic Brandon's parents must have felt. They immediately contacted the authorities, right?
Yeah.
And what followed was this massive search effort.
It wasn't just some small-town search party. I mean, we're talking hundreds of volunteers, law enforcement. They even called in the National Guard.
Wow.
They used, dogs, divers, helicopters, everything they could think of to find some trace of Brandon.
They really threw everything they had at it.
Yeah, over 100 square miles of rural Minnesota were, meticulously searched.
That's a huge search area. But here's the thing. Despite all that effort, they found, almost nothing. They found his car, of course.
Right.
Which confirmed that initial disorientation that we were talking about.
Right.
But no sign of Brandon himself.
And this is where those cell phone pings really become crucial.
Okay.
For those who might not know, pings are basically these signals that are sent between a phone and nearby cell towers.
Okay.
And they create this sort of digital breadcrumb trail of Brandon's movements.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
And these pings led investigators to a particularly unsettling location, the Yellow Medicine River.
Oh, wow. And that's not just some little creek, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about a river that, while it's not particularly wide, it can have some really treacherous currents, especially in the spring.
Right.
It'd be so easy to imagine how someone could be swept away, even in a relatively shallow area.
And that's actually, it leads us to the theory that most people kind of point to first, which is accidental drowning.
Okay.
It's a plausible scenario, right? A young man lost in the dark, maybe a little disoriented, maybe even starting to panic. He could have strayed too close to the riverbank, fallen in, a tragic accident.
Yeah. Especially if something was affecting his judgment, like
Yeah.
like we were talking about before, like whether it was alcohol or some kind of, medical situation. But like you said, they searched really extensively. So wouldn't there be some sign of him if he had drowned?
That's exactly the point, though, that makes this case so perplexing. If he did fall into the river, you'd think something would have been found. Obviously there are challenges in searching a river, especially one that's, some current and is kind of dynamic.
Right.
But still, it's a significant piece of the puzzle that doesn't quite fit.
So what other possibilities are there? Like what could have happened to Brandon if it wasn't an accident in the river?
Well, one theory is that he maybe was the victim of some kind of misadventure.
Okay.
You know how it is. Rural areas, while often seen as peaceful, they can actually hold a lot of hidden dangers.
Right.
Like, old unmarked wells or sinkholes, things like that, or even just getting disoriented and succumbing to the elements.
Yeah, like those unmarked wells. It's like you'd never know they were there until it was too late.
Exactly.
It's a chilling thought.
And because of the lack of evidence, it's really difficult to rule that out entirely. However, like the accidental drowning theory, it's hampered by the lack of, any sort of physical evidence.
Yeah.
You'd hope for some sign, something.
It's almost like the more we uncover, the deeper the mystery gets. So we've got these accidental possibilities, but are there any theories that point to something a bit more intentional?
Of course, and it's impossible to ignore those final words. Oh shit! Like it really suggests this sudden realization of danger, almost like a reaction to something unexpected. It certainly leaves room for theories that involve foul play.
Yeah, it's definitely the kind of detail that just sparks your imagination, right?
Right.
Like, could he have encountered someone out there in the dark? Was he the victim of a hit and run?
Yeah, and those are all questions that investigators considered, but it's really important to remember that while statistically less likely, especially in a sparsely populated area like that, foul play can't be entirely dismissed.
Right.
And again, the lack of evidence in this case, it makes it really difficult to draw any sort of definitive conclusions.
So we've got the river, we've got the possibility of a tragic accident on land, and then there's this unsettling possibility of something more sinister. But there's another aspect we haven't really touched on yet. What about the wildlife?
Ah, yes, the wildlife theory. It's true that coyotes are, they're pretty prevalent in that area of Minnesota, and they have been known to attack humans. It's a frightening thought.
Yeah, I don't know why, but coyotes always give me the chills, like more so than even some of the bigger predators.
Right.
It's just these just seem so cunning. But if a coyote, or any wild animal for that matter, had attacked Brandon, wouldn't there be some kind of evidence?
That's typically the case. Animal attacks, as tragic as they are, they usually leave behind very significant evidence. Bite marks, clothing tears, signs of a struggle.
Right.
And just like the other theories that we've discussed, this is where the lack of any such evidence in Brandon's case becomes, a major stumbling block.
So we've got a handful of theories, each with its own set of pros and cons, but none of them completely add up. It's like we're stuck going in circles. We've got all these pieces, but none of them quite fit.
It's definitely a case that, highlights how hard it can be to find answers when there are so many unknowns. But even with the tragedy, the frustration, there's another layer to this, something that shows how sometimes you can turn grief into something meaningful.
You're talking about Brandon's Law, right? I read a little bit about that, but I'd love to hear more about how it all came about.
Absolutely. So after Brandon disappeared, his family, they were, understandably, they were really frustrated, not just by the lack of answers, but also by what they felt was kind of a slow response from law enforcement at the beginning.
Right.
They believed that, really precious time, crucial time in those first hours and days after someone goes missing, it had been lost.
It makes you think, how many other families must have felt the same way before Brandon's Law? That agonizing, just hoping against hope that their loved one would just turn up.
Exactly. And the Swanson family, they were determined to take their grief, their frustration, and turn it into something positive to try to prevent other families from having to experience that same anguish, that inaction. So they became really vocal advocates for change, pushing for legislation that would require, a much faster response to missing person cases, especially for young adults.
And that determination, it actually led to real change, which is incredible.
It really is. In 2009, Minnesota, they passed Brandon's Law. And basically what it does is it makes it mandatory for law enforcement to take immediate action whenever someone under the age of 21 is reported missing under what they deem suspicious circumstances. No more waiting, no more assuming they'll just show up. It's quite a legacy, born from such a heartbreaking loss.
It's a bittersweet victory, isn't it? They lost their son, but in his name, they were able to create something positive, something that could actually save other families from that same pain.
It really speaks to the importance of using your voice, even when you're dealing with unimaginable loss. Brandon's case, as much as it's about the unknown, it's also about the power of action, of pushing for change when things just don't make sense.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest stories, there can be a little bit of light, a little piece of, of the human spirit to find hope, to create something meaningful, even when faced with tragedy.
It's cases like Brandon Swanson's that really stay with you. The lack of closure, those lingering questions, they challenge you to think critically about everything, about the world around us.
They make you realize how quickly everything can change, how easily someone can just vanish. It's a stark reminder to really cherish the people that we're close to and to never take them for granted.
And maybe that's the biggest takeaway from this whole deep dive. We may never have all the answers in cases like Brandon's, but they remind us, they remind us that life is fragile and that compassion and understanding and never giving up on the truth, those things are really important.
It's been a deep dive into a truly perplexing case, and I know it's one that I won't forget anytime soon. Thank you for joining us as we explored this haunting mystery. And a special thanks to you, the listener, for sending this our way. Keep asking those questions, keep searching for answers, and never stop learning. Until next time, stay curious.